Welcome everyone to another very special episode of Nice Friendly Chatranger, our interview series where we talk about people in the tokusatsu community and highlight their amazing fan works and indie tokusatsu and just anything that I think needs to be brought a little bit more to the foreground in the tokusatsu community. For those who might be tuning in and not know who I am, my name is Super Ichi. I am Bluecaster, showrunner here at Radio Sentai Castranger. If you haven't checked out our show already, we do a podcast every week where we talk about Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and a third thing, and we've been doing that since 2014. Previously, on our last episode, we had the wonderful Tom Constantine, thanks to that interview, he has connected me with the lovely gentleman who is here for this week's episode of Nice Friendly Chatranger. Would you like to please introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning, and good time of day, whatever part of the world it is you're listening to this to. My name is Max Ellis. I'm the founder of Shield and Sword Productions, and I'm the director and lead of Avalon, Knight of the Round Table, an indie tokusatsu available on YouTube.
Yes, very excellent. While we were speaking with Tom, he made me aware of the existence of this series Avalon that he has worked on with you. And let me just say right out of the gate, night-themed tokusatsu is the most me-coded shit anyone could ever make. You make a night-themed tokusatsu, and I am in immediately with no further context.
Oh, fantastic.
So, safe to say I enjoyed the episodes that I've seen, and I'm looking forward to the Season 2 that you guys are now in production on, I believe?
Yes, that's correct. We've got the entire first... For those who don't know, the first season of Avalon is 5 episodes long, and it's available on our official YouTube channel. And we're currently in production of Season 2 onwards, hoping to have Episode 6 released in the near future.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to make sure that I have a link to that playlist where people can watch those first few episodes in the description of this video, which of course will lead to your channel if they want to see more from you and anything else that you've produced.
Okay.
But the main reason we're here today is because I've collected a list of questions from the Castranger Discord community, from those who we call the CastFans, because everyone here in this Discord is also very passionate and interested in indie tokusatsu, so we wanted a little bit of insight into one of the creative minds out there in the community. So I'm going to read some of these questions here and let you know who asked them, and we'll just get through these. So I got about 10 or so questions. And feel free to talk as much or as little as you want about each of these. Inject any other anecdotes you've got, and we'll just go from here.
Sure.
So first question comes from Red Hood 22, who asks, what inspired you to create?
To create in general.
Yeah, just to be a creator.
So I started playing around with filmmaking and video making back in secondary school, high school, for those of you in the States. And it was something that, I had heard about. It was an selective course you could take at my school, and I gave it a go, and I was just like, this is fantastic. I want to do more of this. And so that's really what got me started onto video making in general. And so I've been making like bits and pieces here and there ever since then, and some of those are on YouTube, some of them are just but school projects, so I didn't really want to release those. So that's really how I got started in creating videos. And for creating tokusatsu, so I growing up as a small boy, I watched Power Rangers and all that when I was younger, but I didn't know the connection to Japanese tokusatsu until I got to university and someone showed me the original Japanese versions of these shows. I was just like, I watched these when I was a child. And so, I watched some of that and then instantly got hooked and watched more and more and more. And then I moved out to Japan after university, and I wanted to combine those two passions, so video making and tokusatsu, and started trying making my own independent series a couple of years after I started living here.
All right, which leads right into our next question from Tara Z. who wants to know what the story is behind the background of creating Avalon specifically.
So there are a number of influences there. So first of all, creating Avalon specifically. So Avalon is the second tokusatsu series I've worked on. The first is a different show called Cyber Ninja Tekaraija.
That sounds cool.
And that was really I'll find a link for that and I'll share that in the chat as well.
Is it up on the same channel that Avalon's on?
Yep, in the same on the same YouTube. Here we go. I'll just share the link.
Just because you're new to the server, the bot disables links from anyone under like a certain level. But you can DM the link to me and I'll put it in the description.
Okay. Okay. Remind me later which ones I'll post them later. Mm-hmm. So after I made, obviously it was Cyber Ninja Tekaraija was my first ever tokusatsu attempt, and there was a lot of learning going on in that, and so I wanted to take what I learned and do something much better with the next series that I worked on. So that was the first influence, and the second one was I wanted to combine my British culture and my British heritage into something more unique. So, Cyber Ninja Tekaraija was, as a first attempt, everyone knows ninjas, everyone understands technology, sort of. And so that was an easy genre to try and do. But I wanted to be more adventurous and create something more unique the next time around. And so combining that gave me the inspiration for, I took inspiration from the Legends of King Arthur and British culture and heritage. And so that was sort of how Avalon started as the very roots of Avalon comes from there.
Very cool. This isn't in the list of questions, but something that came to mind while you were talking about just on the topic of like taking European history and culture and mythology and bringing it into the Japanese format of tokusatsu. I'm wondering if you've seen a show called Mystic Knights of Tir na nog.
Did I watch Mystic Knights of Tir na nog, the 50-episode long Irish, but filmed in Ireland fantasy tokusatsu themed show? Doesn't ring a bell.
Yeah, that is. I also consider that a very influential show from my childhood.
Oh, it was, yes, Power Rangers and all that, but honestly, if you gave me the option between rewatching all of the 90s series Power Rangers shows and rewatching all of Mystic Knights Tir na nog, I'd watch that. Mystic Knights every day. That was honestly, that was very. That was part of my childhood, essentially. And so, my personal, my pet dream, which is obviously never going to happen, but I always think about, if only I could do a crossover of Avalon meets the Mystic Knights of Tir na nog.
Oh, that would be amazing.
This is semi non-canon, but the Mystic Knights of Tir na nog are set in a time of history that predates Avalon. So if I was ever to do a crossover, it would be like, Avalon actually knew about the Mystic Knights of Tir na nog, and they were like fairy tales to him when he was a small boy.
Of course. All right.
That's obviously a big pipe dream that's probably never going to happen.
I'd never say never. You never know how far you can take it.
It would be fantastic. I have a very strong suspicion that the suits don't actually exist anymore.
Yeah,
so that would be a shame if that happened. Also, I think one of the actors died. I'm not sure. I think the Mystic Knights of Earth. I think I read somewhere he died, but
I don't know. Unfortunate if true.
Yeah, very unfortunate if true.
All right. Our next question. Sorry, did you have something else?
No, I was just gonna say, yep. Sorry, I segued there a bit. Sorry.
Yeah. So next question comes from ALX002. What do you think is the best part of Avalon? Which also branches right into another question that I'll sort of two-part this with. From 24/7, what do you think makes Avalon different / stand out from other indie tokusatsu?
So that first one is, a little tricky to answer because, I don't want to say one thing's my favorite because that implies that something else isn't my favorite.
Understandable.
Yeah. And obviously, this is my project, so I've enjoyed 99% of making and being part of this show. There's always, the 1% where everything's happening at once and it can get a bit stressful and a bit hard at times. But I very much enjoyed a lot of this show. If I had to, I assume saying favorite is, let's say that's a favorite clip or something from the show.
Yeah, the question was not very specific. It was just, what is the best part of Avalon? So I feel like that's up for interpretation, however you want to choose to come at that question.
Okay, so I'll interpret that as which is one of my favorite moments from the show. And so I'll pick two, which are incidentally from the same episode. So from episode 1, one of my favorite moments is the bit after Tatsumaki Ryuji, the protagonist, after he arrives to rescue Akine Eiji, and Akine Eiji is surprised by everyone being able to speak Japanese, including the orcs. And that's a personal favorite for me because that was a fun little tidbit that I put in, and yet surprisingly, a lot of people have said that that's their favorite joke in the whole show.
Oh, nice.
Which, obviously I'm pleased people enjoyed that, but it just surprises me because I wasn't sure people were going to find that joke very funny. And also, that filming that scene in general was one of my favorites so far because that was when we had the legendary tokusatsu director Sakamoto Koichi there on set helping us on production that day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I met him when I was training at Alpha Stunts, the gym he used to run, and got friendly with him. I mean, yeah, he's the nicest guy in the world.
I've heard that a lot.
Yeah, I mean, he's just the biggest. He's a massive nerd. He's one of us.
Oh yeah,
and he's just a fantastic guy and lots of fun to be with. And so on this day, on this shoot, where I was filming what was going to be the first fight scene of Avalon in the entire show, the first action, I was just like, let's see if he'll want to come along and help with production that day. And so, expecting him to be too busy, I messaged him being just like, hey, are you available to come and help me this day? And it's just like, yeah, sure, I'll be there. Tell me how to get there. And so, yeah, that was a really fun experience having him there on set as well.
Very cool.
And then the second question was, what was the second question?
What do you think makes Avalon stand out against other, not against, but among other indie tokusatsu projects?
So obviously there are lots of indie tokusatsu in different parts of the world. So even in Japan, there are lots of people doing it in Japan on their own, and there's a huge local hero community. And I like to think that they're a indie tokusatsu in a certain way. Obviously in Japan, the thing that makes Avalon stand out the most is the fact that he's an actual British person. He's not like a Japanese person who says, "Oh, I'm from Britain," but actually there's zero evidence to show that they're from Britain, that they have any foreign heritage.
Yeah.
Avalon is 100% British and has a proper heritage and culture, and we try very hard to reflect that into the show. And what I like to think makes Avalon the show stand out amongst other people doing indie tokusatsu work is we put a lot of effort into selling it, as in we didn't just pick up a camera and we're not people with zero experience with action, zero filmmaking experience. We actively learn new techniques and we practice different camera work stuff. Tom, our action director, is an incredibly skilled stuntman, and he is always capable of working out really unique and interesting action to do. And we make it. We're not amateurish. We are seriously. We like to think that we put the same level of effort in as some major productions.
Yeah, I will say that, like, I've seen a fair amount of indie tokusatsu, and usually you can easily tell by, like, the camera work and cinematography when, you know, they haven't done this very much. And I can confidently say that the entire 5-episode run of Avalon, I never had that nagging feeling watching it. Like, it felt like I was really watching an actual tokusatsu show.
Thank you. That means a lot. I mean, you know, everybody's always doing their best. You know, I'm not going to knock other shows because they couldn't do certain things and we could. But, you know, it is a shame when certain people funnel all of their resources and time into only one aspect of the show, as opposed to trying to, you know, be aware and support the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And about the whole leaning into being genuinely British in this Japanese series, I'll talk about this more when we discuss Avalon as a feature topic on our main podcast. But I think one of my favorite aspects of Avalon is the fact that the moments where he would speak in actual English the most were while he was transformed as Avalon, and I thought that was a fun choice to make.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I mean, that wasn't. You know, I'll be honest, that wasn't necessarily a conscious decision to, you know, he only speaks British after he transforms. It's just that as the dialogue and the story unfolded, that just sort of happened. But yeah, equally, that's also something that putting the British in, you know, one of the things that I really wanted to emphasize at Avalon is that foreigners can speak Japanese. You know, it's you know, one of the things. I have a story from tokusatsu in Japan where Robert Baldwin, because he could speak fluent Japanese and he could sound Japanese when he speaks. Oh, yeah. But, you know, whenever he was in a show, he always had to dial it down a bit and make it like "Watashi ni wa makase de kudasai."
Yes, I loved Robert Baldwin as Kyoryu Cyan. I believe he passed away recently too. God rest his soul. He's an amazing actor.
He did. God rest his soul.
And Canadian as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, you know, I always hate it when foreigners aren't, you know, are represented in tokusatsu as not being able to speak Japanese properly. So, you know, with the acting in Avalon, we wanted to make sure that, you know, when speaking Japanese, you know, he might slip occasionally. There might be the occasional blip, but, you know, we're properly speaking Japanese.
Yeah.
And so when he slips and says English, that's always when he's not concentrating, because obviously you need to focus a bit when you're speaking a different language to make sure you say things right.
That was how I interpreted it, because I interpreted it as he slips back into English when he's fighting because he's focused on the fighting. Like, while he's in the suit and swinging the sword around, there's a lot of bugger and have at you and all that. So if that wasn't a conscious choice, that is kind of interesting, actually.
I mean, so, you know, it wasn't a conscious choice to make it only in the suit, but it's when he's flustered or when he can't focus 100% on speaking Japanese. So, you know, like mid-fighting or when something takes him by surprise. You know, we're mixing that up a bit more going into the season 2. That'll be something you'll notice a bit more, but yeah, so we wanted to make sure that there is some proper English in there and proper British English as well.
Of course. All right. Our next question comes from Blaze, who is actually here in the Discord listening as we record this.
Hello, nice to meet you.
This is another sort of two-parter, as the questions are very relevant to each other. First off, were there any sacrifices that had to be made to bring Avalon to life, or is it more or less exactly how you envisioned it? That said, if budget were no issue, what do you think would be your biggest priority when it comes to the series? For example, upgrading suits, hiring more staff, editors, graphic designers, more impressive stunt work, or however you choose to interpret that.
Okay, so starting with sacrifices. Obviously, when you make any sort of show, not just tokusatsu, that you have to work within your limits and you have to think realistically. So originally, Avalon was going to be, the original Avalon design that I had in mind when I was first creating the concept was drastically different. It was going to be, he was going to look more like a normal knight, and he was going to have a belt where he could put in certain items, and he would get different weapons and forms based on characters in the Legends of King Arthur.
Oh, so he was more of a gimmick user, like other.
Yeah, exactly. But
Interesting.
the thing, I mean, that was obviously inspired by a lot of the Heisei shows, but the issue with that is that then you've not only got to make the base suit, you've got to make all these other form changes and power ups, and you've got to, the reason why shows like Super Sentai and all that can do that is because they have toys to sell, and they have to sell those toys.
Of course.
I don't, which would have meant I'd have had a sod ton of suits and parts that basically wouldn't get much use, and so that was not really a sensible way to go. And also, it wouldn't have really made Avalon very unique or different. So, I won't say this is a sacrifice. This is more of a looking at it, thinking this isn't really practical. Let's try something a bit different. And so that's why we went with a different theme. I won't explain too much about why Avalon looks the way he does just now, because that's sort of spoilerish for season 2. It goes more into the backstory of the character. But yeah, after that, in terms of sacrifices, sometimes we would hit certain roadblocks in terms of locations, especially because in Tokyo you can't just film anywhere. A lot of places you need to go through a lot of paperwork and pay a lot to use certain locations. So we had to. Going back to episode 1, for example, the scene we were filming, people will recognize the scene where Avalon does his first transformation, but then we had to change locations for the actual action. And that's because we thought we were in a public park, but then the police came along and told us to bugger off.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, sometimes that can happen. If you're in a public space and you're not disturbing anybody, then usually the police won't really be called along unless someone tells them about us, and they come along and just check that you're not doing anything illegal. But that area specifically, Odaiba in Tokyo, by the way, for those who are interested, that area is a bit more up and coming, so the police are a bit stricter about that. So they weren't just going to leave us alone. They didn't arrest us or anything; they just told us to please go away.
Yeah.
Yeah, but obviously, when you're filming independently and you can't say you can't really monopolize the area, you have to listen to that. Otherwise, then they will arrest you.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, there's not really been a great deal of sacrifice. There have been losses, though, and that it was part of an important life learning lesson. Always back up your data, because you never know when a hard disk containing 4 years of your work is going to crash and you're going to be unable to revive a big chunk of information and data.
Oh no, did that happen?
Yeah, that's why you might notice in episodes 4 and 5 of Avalon there are certain, I'm going to call them technical blips, where there's just some data that we couldn't recover and we couldn't reshoot. And yeah, in episode 2, when the character Akina ages in the park, you might notice that the park suddenly changes background a bit, and that's because we had to reshoot one scene that we couldn't recover and we absolutely needed. But yeah, so there have been losses like that, but we still managed to make it. We haven't necessarily sacrificed anything a great deal.
Yeah, sacrifice would imply like the choice to do so, but it seems like what you're describing is more of things you wanted to do but weren't able to do, and things and losses that occurred that were not by choice.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's like I said, when you're making independent tokusatsu, you have to prioritize where you spend the budget, and that'll lead into answering the second question. So, at the start of the show, this is for anybody else interested in making tokusatsu. The thing you want to spend the most budget on at the start is your suits. So your hero character and your villains especially, because that's how you build your world.
Those are arguably what people are coming for.
Yeah, exactly. And then going forward, I'd say if budget was no issue, I would want to spend most of the rest of the budget primarily on locations, because that way you get permission to use these locations. There's actually something we're doing in season 2 now, is we're prioritizing locations that we actually have permission to film at, and we can be there for as long as we want without being told to go away, or without having people running in the background and stuff like that. But obviously that comes with certain issues where we have to actually find these locations. They have to allow us to use them. But yeah, if budget was no issue, I would want to pay out to use these locations. And then the second thing I would spend the money on is people, specifically all the people who take time out of their daily lives to come and help me, and all these like people who are professional actors and stunt people who come and join the show. I obviously pay them for their time, and I pay them for their transport, which is like the minimum you have to pay anybody on any shoot is transport and food. But I always feel a bit guilty, like I'm basically paying them a pittance of what they should be earning.
So you would pay them more, is what you're saying?
I would pay some people a certain salary. Some people who, because they earn it, they are all professionals, and they give their heart and soul every single time they come to the shoot, and it is really. I really wish that I could return that favor properly.
No, yeah,
like, professionally, if that makes sense.
No, makes perfect sense to me. I think that's a very good choice. All right, excellent.
Yeah, and then, as I said, locations. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Next question comes from one of our core cast, Northcaster Saga. We call him Cell on the show. He wants to know, were there any designs for suits, weapons, etc. that you liked but ended up not making or using?
So as I mentioned earlier, the original Avalon design was drastically different. And for practicality reasons, we ended up not doing that one. But that's not really a regret. I think that was like, we looked at one thing, this wasn't really going to work out, and we went a different way with it. There haven't been many designs that we said, we weren't going to use this at all, or we looked at a design and just like, no, this isn't going to work, let's drop this. We have certain ideas and things we'd like to try in future seasons, but we just haven't really gotten to the point where we can practically do those yet. So they're on sort of like a backlog of, if we had the chance, we might do this kind of thing. In terms of like the main suit and designs and stuff, I've mostly been leaving that to the suit maker, Komatsu Daisuke, who is a former member of Rainbow, and he worked on I'm pretty sure it was 5 through to Kabuto.
Nice.
Yeah, so he's a professional, and this goes back to Tekkaraija, where Tekkaraija's first form, his original form, that was my design, and then trying to make the second season of that, and looking at new characters, and I let Komatsu-san do the design for the power-up forms and the new heroes, and they were drastically better. So I learned there, I know things that I like, but I can't design them to be the way they need to be. So I trusted a lot of the design work to Komatsu-san for for Avalon, and the result is fantastic. So no regrets there.
All right, cool. And something I thought I wanted to ask with regards to this prototype, more gimmick-oriented version of Avalon that you mentioned, do you have any like notes or like artwork or images or anything that people could see that just for those who are curious about what that suit looked like and what sort of gimmicks and weapons he would have used?
So we never got as far as actually making the suit design. I think somewhere in my photo banks I've got a photo of a prop that I was that I would show to that I made that I would show to the suit maker guy, and we just said this is what I'm thinking for his transformation item. But it's naff. Sorry, it wasn't very good. And yeah, as I said, we never got to the full design stage for that version of Avalon, because we realized very quickly, looking at the concept and talking to the suit guy, I just like, this isn't going to work, so let's not start there.
Understandable. Did you at least like make a list of what weapons his other forms would have used?
Yeah, he was going to have so most of the other knights of the round table, so like Sir Kay would be his shield, Sir Bedivere would have summoned his sword, he would have had a mid power-up, which would have been Lancelot, and then King Arthur obviously would have been his super mode. And I wanted to do an archer form with Robin Hood, and there was going to be a running joke where, that Robin Hood isn't a Knight of the Round Table, but as I said, I never really delved very deeply into that, because it wasn't worth the time to think of how certain things would work, and yeah.
No, I think that's pretty neat, and the discrepancy of like I like the idea of the forms being based on these characters from the Avalon mythology and having designated weapons associated with them. And then I think including Robin Hood for the sake of having an archery form, I think that would have been a really good gag for the show.
Yeah, it's stuff that I do think about sometimes. I wonder if maybe in the later series we can try and work something out. But as I said, a big issue with that is that then you've got a load of props that if you can't use, they're going to go to waste.
Yeah.
And
no, I understand perfectly why you didn't end up going in that direction. It's just a fun thought experiment to expound on, I think.
Yeah, and also you've got to make sure you don't blur your original character too much. Throwing all these things, it would have meant that Avalon himself would have just been quite plain and not nearly as interesting. Without the form changes.
Mm-hmm.
So that was something I wanted to do, but obviously, practically wise, it didn't work out.
No, of course.
Yeah, and I still get a lot of comments on Twitter every so often, people being just like, "Hey, is he going to get this sort of form or whatever? Is this going to happen?" I don't answer a lot of those simply because I don't want to completely out any possibility. But yeah, right now there's no plans to do that, to do something for certain.
So as I mentioned, Blaze is listening to this as a recording, and he's popped another question here in the Discord that relates to what we were just talking about the heroic gimmick forms. He's asking, since you mentioned Robin Hood, would you have considered any other European folklore to reference, such as Beowulf?
So first of all, European, I like to think of if to build more of the world of Avalon, what if there was this character from this country, sort of thing. But no, I wouldn't step into other countries' cultures because I don't know them as well as my own.
Makes sense.
In terms of other characters from British folklore, like Robin Hood, it's fun to think about, but I don't necessarily know how I would work that as a story just yet. but as time goes by, if I make another series, I might do something different. But yeah, so far I wasn't. I stuck with King Arthur because that's something that everyone around the world knows about to a certain extent. Even in Japan, there's a big King Arthur fan following here.
Yeah.
So it was an easy choice for which character from folklore to focus on. But yeah, that doesn't mean that in the future we won't try and do something different.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now, King Arthur was just the top choice, and no, I wouldn't step on the toes of any other country's culture.
No, yeah, makes sense to me. And just another thought I had with regards to Robin Hood is maybe in the future, instead of making the Robin Hood form an Avalon power-up, maybe there could be like a rival character with a Robin Hood themed power set of their own.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to out that entirely, but there's always the possibility that something goes up. We do have other characters turning up in season 2 that are quite heavy, that do take influence from British culture and British fantasy folklore, especially. And obviously, all of the quote unquote monster characters in Avalon, they reference British culture quite a bit. So you've got orcs and ogres, whites from the Barrow Whites sort of thing. So there's always going to be bits and pieces of British culture popping up. So I won't completely out the possibility of a Robin Hood in the future.
And I'll talk about this more when we discuss Avalon as a topic as well. But one of the other things I really liked was how you integrated typical fantasy monster races as just like a subculture living in normal Earth. And the setup for them as both attempting to be a peaceful monster species, but also there's these outlying renegades attacking humanity. I thought that was a really nice plot setup.
Thank you. That's actually an important part of world building for Avalon. So, another big inspiration for me growing up was Lord of the Rings. And, watching all the making ofs and stuff. And, they made the Lord of the Rings to be a part of our world, but a different era in history. And so when thinking about characters and monster creatures and stuff, I wanted to take these references. I wanted to think of characters that could have influenced the culture. So, for example, you notice the orcs have blue faces, and the idea behind that is that they would have inspired do you guys know woads? Actually, no. Let me something more realistic. So you know how Braveheart, all the Scottish people, they have their blue painted faces, and so that's like a tribal war paint called woading in British culture. And so the idea was that the orcs would have been like the original ones. So like they inspired the humans to paint their faces blue to go into battle to make them more scary.
Okay.
Yeah, and also talking about they're part of the world. The difference between the renegades and stuff. That was also a big influence for when I was designing Avalon's character, because this was happening during COVID, and there was a lot of negative news about foreigners. All foreigners are bad. They're bringing the virus and all that, and that really upset me. And so I wanted to make Avalon a benevolent hero, where it's not just because you're a monster, it doesn't necessarily mean you're evil. And so there are good monster characters. Just because you're an orc, it doesn't necessarily mean you're a villain. And just because you're a human, it doesn't necessarily mean that that you should be protected. And I drew a little influence from bits and pieces, like other shows that do similar things, where you occasionally in stuff like Kamen Rider and Super Sentai, you get these monster characters that are they're kaijin, but they're not villains. And so that's why with the folk of the Fae, as they're called in the world of Avalon, they're a race, and it doesn't and just because they're different from humans, it doesn't mean they're evil. Because that was something I really strongly wanted to emphasize with the show.
Yeah, and I also think that's a very good lesson to teach children, because at the heart of it, tokusatsu is largely aimed at younger viewers. So having a lesson like that baked into it, I think, is a very good thing to have.
exactly. I mean, I don't know how many people noticed that in the show, but it's something I take very strongly to heart, and I want to make sure that I properly emphasize this fact. That's why Avalon, he gives the monsters second chances.
Mm-hmm.
He has rules, and he doesn't give them third chances, but he gives anyone a chance to start over again, no matter even if they're a monster or if they're a human. He doesn't just go, you're a monster, I'm going to destroy you. It's just like, you've got one chance to start over again. So he tries to give them a chance to be good in the end.
Yeah, I have to say, like, overall, for a show that basically amounts to an hour of content, I was impressed by the depth of it, with like the characters and the subtlety and the world building. It was all very nicely packaged for just basically an hour of content.
Thank you. That really means a lot to me.
All right. Next question here is one that I have added to the list myself. As I said at the top of this episode, I'm a big fan of night-themed tokusatsu. So, seeing what Avalon has started with this series, is there any chance we will see other transforming heroes in the next season, in the same way that Saber had a cast of different elemental-themed heroes?
Ooh, we've got some interesting content coming up for you then.
Ooh.
I'm not going to go into spoilers, but so actually, I don't know how aware you guys will be of this, but we did a crowdfunding program last year to raise a budget for season 2, and a lot of that has gone into new suits and new characters for season 2. Actually, on our Shield and Sword Production X account, we've been posting photos and stuff, and there might be occasional hints of things you might see coming up soon.
Nice.
But yeah, there's a lot more interesting content coming up, and I'm looking forward to seeing people's reactions to some of that.
I hope there's a blue one. I will really like him.
Oh, you might be satisfied, sort of.
Let me just put it to you this way: Kamen Rider Blades is my #1 favorite suit in all of tokusatsu.
Yeah, that's a pretty good suit.
All right, I'm excited.
Yeah. Next
question comes from Tara Z. Besides Avalon, do you have any other projects planned for the future?
So as people might have seen in my X and whatever, when posting about these shows that I make, I label them as EGT heroes. That stands for Earl Grey Tokusatsu Heroes.
Nice.
The idea for that being, so you guys know spaghetti westerns, right?
Uh-huh.
Western films made by an Italian guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was making like Chatranger, I was just like, what would you call tokusatsu made by a British guy? And so that became the inspiration for that. And with that, I want to build more characters, and I want to do more series, and I've got lots of ideas of things that I want to do in the future. But the thing is it takes a lot of financing to just make one show, and you need a lot of space for suits. I actually just moved house, and I specifically chose a house where I'd have room to store all my suits, and I haven't really got room just now for a lot more suits, but I have lots of different ideas of things I want to do and try in the future. Branching out to different genres and got different story themes and ideas, but it doesn't necessarily mean I won't do them, but realistically and practicality, I have to focus on Avalon just now. Otherwise, all the budget's going to go in the wrong direction, and and so Avalon's the priority right now. But once we finish the series of Avalon, there'll be another show in the future.
Yeah, of course. You want to get the brand off the ground.
Yeah, exactly. And one thing I posted about in X, and this will be in Japanese, so people might not understand it, is I'm open to people who I've opened children's productions to people who want to make their own ideas and who want to make their own series, and be like, we can cooperate with you, but you might, but on the proviso that you label yourself as an EGT hero, to build more of the world that way. So it's collaborating with other people, and other people who want to make stuff but don't necessarily have the skills we have, is sharing and helping them go off the ground, and we we get a little something back out of that.
Yeah. So you're focused on making this sort of like overarching parent brand franchise, sort of like MCU thing where there's different heroes all occupying the same sort of franchise space.
Yeah, I'd really like to do that. I have an idea. I'm going to try and work in a bit. Well, we'll see. In season 2, there's something that will come up that will be the start of the quote unquote MCU of my world.
Yeah.
But we have to get that far yet, and that's why, focusing on Avalon just now.
You got to wait till season 3, and then you have the pilot episode of that season be the secret pilot for a completely unrelated show, the same way Mighty Morphin did with Master Rider.
Yeah, something like that.
Yep. Alrighty, and our last question is another question from our very good friend Blaze here. Any advice for people who are thinking about creating their own project such as yours someday?
So someone asked me a similar question before when we did the screening event, and my first bit of advice is, if you want to do something, do it. Don't just have this idea in your mind and just never do anything with it. If you want to do something, the first step is always to do it, is to commit to doing it and say that I want to make this show because I want, for whatever reason, and so I'm going to do it. And then you might hit roadblocks, you might hit, you might have to rethink things and work within your limit. But, if you don't try and do something, it's just a waste. At the end of the day, one day we're all going to die. And okay, so we're all going to die one day, and at the end of the day, and when that time happens, do you want to spend your last days thinking about all the things you didn't do, or do you want to look back on the things that you did do? So that's my first bit of advice, is always, if you're going to do something, commit to doing it. My second bit of advice, as I mentioned earlier, always back up your data.
Yeah.
Like, have multiple hard disks, have a cloud server, have a hard disk that you put in a locked chest at the bottom of a volcano for all I care. Just always save a copy, because you never know how heartbreaking it is when you lose a sod ton of data. It's genuinely, that was honestly my biggest despairing moment of the entire show. And then the next bit of advice is, find people who will do this with you. I've got amazing people like Tom and Tony and all the stunt guys and people I've met here in Japan who, as I mentioned earlier in the show, I'm paying them a pittance. I'm taking time out of their day, but our shoots are fun because we all enjoy doing it together. We're all just a bunch of mad nerds having fun and doing this thing that we enjoy doing and we want to do. And so, you don't want to have a team where you're only paying people to turn up, because then they're not really committed to it. Everybody who turns up to my shoot, we all have fun on our shoots and we all enjoy the show that we're making and the things that we do. And so find yourself a team of people who you want to spend this time with and who will cooperate with you and who will help you. Because without, you can't make any sort of film, you can't really do any sort of video production work alone. And so you need a team by your side that you can trust and who you can depend on to get you to the finish line. I have one other thing. What was I going to say? Okay. And one other bit of advice is, know your limits. So with Avalon, we mentioned earlier, if budget was no issue, what would I do? But the thing is budget is an issue because I'm paying for all this out of my own pocket. Even all the campfire stuff, we've used up most of that now for season 2, and we are going to try and do a Patreon at some point once season 2 started to get more support for the rest of the show. But obviously, you can't commit to doing something and then instantly put yourself in the red. That's just because then you're going to wind up doing something you regret. You don't want to make something that's just like, I can't believe I wasted all my money on this, because that's just a sad thing. That just makes you sad. You have to think, what is my skill set? What am I going to be able to contribute? Which is the bit that I know I can do, and which is the bit that I need someone else to help me do because they're better at this than I am. So like for the suit making, as I mentioned earlier, I would never try to make my own suits because I'm not good at making things, not good at making the cosplay props and stuff. But I know people who are, and there are people who are putting in a lot of time and effort to get better at it that I can't put the same amount of time in. Understand where you excel and where you don't, and where you can't make the time to improve yourself. Trust someone else to have that aspect. I think that's my main bit of advice.
All right. So, TLDR, budget effectively.
Yeah. Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that's fine.
So, number 1, make the first step. Number 2, back up. Number 3, build your team. Number 4, know your limits. I think that sounds about right.
As you were making that list, I love that you can interpret it as step 1, step forward. Step 2, back up.
Oh yeah.
Step 3, get someone else. Step 4, money.
Oh god, yeah. Don't Well, the thing is, you can make tokusatsu for cheap. There are even local heroes out here in Japan who their suits and their costumes are quite cheaply made. You have to think when you're making any sort of video production, you have to know where the budget's going to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, you don't necessarily have to make a full armored suit, a whole ton of form changes and a big armored suit sort of thing. You can make tokusatsu with a cheaper suit. In fact, the very first tokusatsu shows back in the 1940s, they were just people with cloth wrapped around their heads and sunglasses. But they became iconic characters.
Yeah.
So you don't necessarily need to spend all your money on the suits. You don't need to spend a lot to make a tokusatsu hero suit. You just have to know how much you can spend and how much you want to spend.
Yeah. All right. Well, that is it for our Q&A. Thank you very much to Max Ellis for taking time here to talk to us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Of course, it's been a pleasure for me as well. Very fun, very informative. Gained a lot of insight into this Avalon series that I've watched, and hopefully everyone else here at CastRanger who hasn't yet seen it will give it a look once we discuss it on our show. This episode is going to be coming out alongside the actual episode of CastRanger where we discuss Avalon as our feature topic, so everyone will get a nice 1-2 punch of Avalon-themed content.
Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to seeing what people think. I do look for comments, and I do Google search Avalon a lot on in between work when I'm bored. So if anybody has any comments or feedback, I'm always open to hearing them. And we have multiple X accounts. We've got my personal X account, we've got the Shield and Sword Productions official account where we talk a lot about the production, and then Avalon himself has his own X account. So you can go and follow all that for the latest updates on Twitter.
Yeah, I was gonna say if you wanted to let everyone know where those accounts are, so they can find you and provide that feedback.
Oh yeah. So we've also got a Sheldon Sword Productions Instagram account. And those two are the main bits where we post stuff, obviously apart from YouTube, where whenever there's a new episode coming out, that it will be announced on YouTube. And it will be, don't forget to like and subscribe. And don't forget to like and subscribe to Castranger as well if you're not following already.
Thank you very much. Yeah, any other final parting words to anyone who might be listening?
Yeah, I just want to say thank you, because I know that there are a lot of people in the West who watch and support Avalon, and I really appreciate all the comments that I see all the time, and I really appreciate, it really means a lot to me to know that people like and enjoy my show, and I'm looking forward to bringing you more content as soon as possible, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the season when it's released. But yeah, I want to say thank you to everyone who's always commenting and sharing and talking about the show, because it really means a lot to me. Obviously,
it's always
I didn't make Avalon. Yeah, I didn't make Avalon to get attention, but it's always nice to know that your work is appreciated and that people see the thing that you put an effort into making.
Of course, it's always fun to hear a creator talk passionately about their work and be so clearly interested in what they're producing that they want to make it good and they want it to be successful. Those are the kinds of people you want to hear from and you want to follow and you want to see their work.
It's passion. People respond to passion.
Exactly. All right. Well, that is going to be it for this episode of Nice Friendly Chatranger. Huge thank you once again to Max Ellis here for joining us on this episode. And a special shout out to Mr. Tom Constantine for making this connection happen. And hopefully we'll get to talk to some more people with some other just as passionate and interesting content going forward. But to everyone listening, thank you for tuning in, and we will see you on another Castranger video.
Enjoy the rest of whatever time of day it is you are when you're watching the show.
How inclusive.